After searching around Peniche for the post office, I went for a coffee in a new cafe. The girl serving seemed nervous with the language differences between us. An old woman came up and demanded change, holding out a €10 note. The young girl serving me dealt with her early onset xenophobia by opting to deal with the older customer. Anything I said was multiplied by several orders of complexity by the young pasteleria girl. When I pointed at a bolo, which is a donut type thing, and held a finger up, nodding, it seemed she thought I was asking whether the eggs used to make it are corn-fed, organic or free-range. When I pointed at a cake and tried to ask for a bit, it appeared to be as difficult to her as it would have been for me to find out the subtleties of baking. The cake knife wavered around the cake like a broken second hand on a clock, jumping this way and that, back and forwards. I just wanted my cake and eat it. A small black, soft-eared dog broke the faulty clock once and for all by standing up against my hip and licking the finger I had been pointing with. The second, not quite so young pasteleria girl jumped into the language gap between the cake and myself by rattling off a stream of words at the dog. Pleased with the attention, the dog ran behind the counter, reappeared smiling in the way only dog can, went back behind the counter and was finally chased through the doorway to the street outside. Young women said "ciao" while holding well-dressed kids in expensive Gap clothing. One little boy wore a brand new, well-cut denim jacket, corduroy trousers, cotton-rich shirt in a deep green and blood-red t-shirt with trainers of soft, tan-dyed suede. The boy grinned and squirmed in his tall, slim mother's arms, pleased by the attention of her attractive friends who fluttered big make-up eyes at him, blowing ironically flirtatious kisses. I avoided the eyes of these women. They were so good-looking and freshly made, I did not wish to ground the buoyant mood of the cafe by catching the almond-shaped eyes flitting between themselves, the pasteleria staff and me, the foreigner. It was Friday morning, and we were all alive and well. November the 1st. On All Hallows Eve, cars paraded out to the end of the harbour wall and back. People walked, laughed and shouted good-naturedly. I'd noticed witch dolls hanging in souvenir shops with hooked noses, a cursory wart, pointed black hat, astride a broomstick. No problems there, just a regular witch. A psychoanalyst might claim the intent or meaning of a spell is received unconsciously. Therefore, any spell in any language would work on anyone, assuming spells do work. The idea of an unconscious is bizarre, and psychoanalysis is just as strangely unbelievable as witchcraft. Small children came into the pasteleria carrying plastic bags. They addressed everyone, "Bom dia!" They collected sweets as part of either Halloween or All Saints' Day. I was unable to establish the exact day, as the day before I'd lost track after changing my watch, thinking I'd set it wrong and then I didn't know for sure what day it was. teenagers were rejected for being harder and vaguely extortionate in their approach, like bands of clown gangsters asking for treats so they would leave without mishap. They got nothing, while the pre-teenagers received kind smiles and sweets. They wore the colourful urban attire of well-kept families, rich colourings and attractive, well-designed fashions. I've been fortunate since leaving the UK with nothing breaking and only minor sail repairs and engine maintenance needed. Then the water tank in the bow burst and filled the bilge with 80 litres of water, and my laptop computer failed seriously. The water tank was made by Crewsaver, the same company who had made my life jacket, so I hoped the same thing would not happen to the life jacket. The laptop seemed simple after a PC specialist company told me they would save all the data and reinstall Windows, then reposition all my data in the new operating system. But the hard drive would not give up any data, despite having a proper data reading application attached to it. I went home that night depressed at the thought of losing loads of personal files, photographs and music files. The next day the company had extracted all my data, and then they had fitted a new 20 gigabyte hard drive for €120. Peniche Museum was a massive fortification originally built to defend the coast against pirates and foreign invaders. Locals called it the museum, but it was a castle. It enclosed a cove into which the Atlantic slurped through a stone tunnel onto a tiny rocky beach. A stone bridge arched over this enclosed inlet, linking the outer with the inner wall. Stretching over the warm, flat slabs of the bridge, I looked over the edge into the cove. A tide line of plastic bottles, seaweed and offcuts of fish nets lay in a small crescent. Green waves entered, echoing through the tunnel. A pair of dark-coloured lizards twitched below me in foliage, and another lizard halfway up the wall, leading to my spot, slipped into a crevice. A security guard approached through an arched wooden door cut into the massive castle doors at the inner edge of the bridge. He stood watching me through dark, brutal sunglasses. The castle had been a high-security prison during the dictatorship of Salazar. I left the lizards to their sunning and fly hunting in their sun trap, where winter would be held back for weeks. The guard stood in the foyer behind the main doorway to the inner courtyard. A woman visitor suddenly stepped back and exclaiming, "Wah!" A piece of plaster had dropped from the domed roof onto the stone flagons in front of her. The security guard just laughed and prodded at the fallen plaster with his black shoe, and then, unconcerned, hands behind his back, continued to pace about under the entrance lobby. Some pleasant sculptures were propped against the castle walls. The inner area was open air with several other buildings set inside it. The 5-metre thick walls were inset with cannon firing gaps, splayed out to give protection inside but width of view to the outside. Below these bulwarks, sheer cliffs fell vertically to the sea. A white-painted rectangular building had been the anti-fascist dissenters' prison. A guardhouse looked onto around 20 iron-barred windows in 2 stories. I peered through the rusting bars and broken glass cell windows. Cells were regular-sized prison rooms with a round spy hole in a heavy door and a compartment for the slop bucket. The floors looked to be of wood. I could not see, but imagined below the window there would be a sleeping bench. Several cells had been utilised by artists. Model fishing boats were being constructed in wood in 2 cells. A third housed a sculptor working in stone and wood. One cell was derelict and covered in salacious fluorescent graffiti. The actual museum cost €1 to enter, and I paced around the first room, enjoying photographs of pennish school classes from the 1930s. The person who sold me my ticket apologised, saying, "The museum closes in 20 minutes, and there are 3 floors." I wanted to see the anti-fascist resistance part on the top floor, so I decided to come back for another visit. I signed the guest book and left. November the 2nd. 3 pumpkins lay on the ground near some waste bins. They had been hollowed and carved with eyes, nose and teeth. One had been used as a football by children. Halloween had come and gone in Portugal. The harbour was shrouded in grey drizzle. I repositioned the mooring lines of Storm Petrel as they were taking a lot of wear. Peniche was a well-protected harbour, however, there was a constant surge to and fro as the Atlantic swells worked their way in. I was given the daily printout of the meteorological forecast for Portugal from the Marina office as I passed along the quay. Relations with people remained on a very superficial level due to my not knowing the language. In Spain, I would improvise freely and often get completely confused. In Portugal, the language was more difficult to simulate. I got to my regular cafe and ordered a coffee with milk and a bolo, as usual. The English-speaking man about the place asked if I wanted something in my bolo. A bolo was shaped like a jam donut, textured like cake inside, with a pleasant crusty outside sprinkled with coconut. I'd enjoyed several on consecutive mornings. Today I was invited to try butter, ham and cheese in it. I wonder whether April the 1st had a different date in Portugal, or maybe I was being welcomed into the local scene by being harmlessly deluded into eating a sweet pastry with a savoury filling. I sat down and tasted the bolo. Of course the sugary coconut, ham and cheese was discordant. I persevered, but it remained odd as the sweetness went to one part of my taste buds and the savoury to another. The coconut melted into the cheese, but then the deeper note of the ham left the mouthful unresolved right down into my stomach. If the 2 people serving and the patron were having fun, then they were being extremely dry-humoured. There was not a trace of a snigger or hidden giggling. I plodded on through the bolo, but with an uneasy feeling of being the day's entertainment. The patron was impeccably pleasant, as he explained it was a Portuguese speciality. I wondered whether this was an insight not into Portuguese snacks, but rather into Portuguese dry humour, and I was convinced the pastelaria would erupt into laughter when I'd gone. Bay of Biscay still came back into my thoughts sometimes. It had left deep impressions on me. I was glad to have sailed across a part of the ocean, for I'd always wanted to experience being properly offshore for an extended period. To have sailed 530 miles in one go was an experience which had altered my conception of sailing. I felt I had the psychological tools to decide to sail more or less anywhere I wished in the world. The calmness of the seas way out in the western approaches to the English Channel had surprised me. The route from Wales had taken Storm Petrel 20 miles further to the west of the Isles of Scilly to avoid the shipping lanes which lay 15 miles beyond the Scillies. Light variable winds meant Storm Petrel ambled about on a generally southwards course, but her sails slatted to and fro and I could not sleep. I couldn't motor with a huge distance ahead. There was not enough fuel. La Coruna was another world, one I'd often enthused about as a destination in high-spirited rants fueled by a single malt whisky. Sea area Seoul was calm. I was over 100 miles to the west of Ushant, the top left corner of France. Seoul was named after the fish which used to flap about on the continental shelf there, just 100 metres deep, give or take 40 metres. Seabirds were on every horizon. Early one morning I'd passed to the stern of a huge trawler. Behind it a line of turbulence was exploited by thousands of seabirds. I cleared about a mile astern of the trawler. It rumbled with a massive diesel engine on very low speed and listed to starboard under the horrendous drag of a huge trawl net, which I hoped I'd passed already. Thousands of herring gulls flew after the trawler, picking up anything which appeared in the wake. Smaller seabirds swam in the moving path left by the trawler and its net. Then further behind as the wake closed over and fish swam in to feed on the droppings of gulls, hundreds of gannets dived in close succession into shoals of prey. Bam! 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 From 20 metres up. They dived into the same patch of sea sometimes, two hit almost the same spot. The white explosion of water occurred as the large, strong birds plunged in. They disappeared for a few seconds and then reappeared, manoeuvring something in their long bills. Gannets had long wings and were a lot bigger and heavier than the herring gulls. A few days before I left Milford Haven, I'd gone into a chandlery to buy a passage chart, the Bay of Biscay. It sounded dangerous and writhed with disastrous tales as the chandler warned me. It's a bit late to be crossing the bay. A few weeks later, and 700 miles south of Milford Haven, I was in Nazaré, on a concrete wall a German yacht crew had painted. Steve and Stefan, yacht Greenfly, 1963 and 2001. And then they quoted, "They said, you left it too late. We said, Biscay is just a bay." People hold fixed ideas about the best time to sail. People who have sailed further are pragmatic, looking at weather forecasts rather than received wisdom circulated by yacht clubs and chandlers. The voyaging reference book Ocean Passages of the World describes the UK as an area in which passages can be made all year, however the temperature is colder in the winter months than in the summer. That's it. Real knowledge leaves out unnecessary information and drama. November the 4th. On Monday Monday morning and I had a list. Armed with a list, I intended to make the day productive. The last few days had seen drizzle and a cool north breeze, although there was not a hint of the autumnal scent friends in the UK were commenting on. An email from the Cambridgeshire Fens was titled, "Hello from Carrotland," so I replied with, "Hello from Sardine World." With my list I found the post office and sent an overdue library book back to the UK. It was a sailing pilot book of the western French coast, which may have been essential if I had been embayed by strong westerly winds while on passage, although I had not been within 60 miles of France. With my list I repaid a loan a friend had offered me at a time when my mobile phone company had made errors and presented me with a horrendous bill. My list then ordered me into a supermarket to get a couple of 5-litre spring water bottles. These would suffice as water supply bottles while I got round to replacing the flexible 80-litre bow tank. I was amazed at the efficient storage of the flexible tank. To stow 80 litres in solid containers would take 3 times the space because the gaps between cannot be filled. I was in a quandary as to whether to keep the spring water, which was very heavy to carry back to the boat, or discard it. The bottles weighed almost nothing, and it was only them I wanted. The water would be topped up from taps. Wondering if a little spring water would do me good, I struggled home with the bottles and their water. Besides, I felt embarrassed about pouring 10 litres of water into the road or someone's driveway. It was a ridiculous feeling. My list got me to do 2 loads of washing. The marina had a machine which cost just a few euros. The cost of a winter berth in Peniche was extremely cheap, because storm waves frequently broke over the harbour wall and threatened boats in the marina. I was shown a video clip on the marina office PC of the harbour in a storm. The waves were very impressive, but not as impressive as the price of mooring there. Just under 60 euros a month included a pontoon berth with secure key card access, electricity, water and shower. One of the best points about small boats is the reduced running costs. It was explained the harbour does suffer a persistent surge as the Atlantic swell works its way in the form of pressure waves. The effect was a toing and froing of everything in the water, giving ropes and fenders a very hard time. I was warned I'd have to replace mooring lines and fenders regularly. November the 5th. I bought a new shoulder bag in a soft mousy colour with a zip and a long adjustable shoulder strap. It was elegant in a simple, practical style, not posh or dressy. I'd used a black furry bag for years which was a bit cock-a-snoop at convention, and the new bag was more respectable for a small, faraway place. The old furry bag had a tail, a black fur tail like a cow's. I sewed the bag from scratch to my own design. One of the first things I did when stepping ashore in Spain was to hide the tail. I felt it would pull too much unwanted attention, and I was vulnerable on my own. It would give an inroad to someone who wanted to pester me. They would comment on it or tug it. One sunny day I would probably dig out my old furry bag, unveil the tail and stride out in full confidence again. But I felt like blending in a little. The sun was bright and warm and the sky clear blue. The weather forecast gave northerly winds for 3 days. I was very tempted to sail down to the Algarve with the favourable winds, but the price and facilities in Peniche were highly attractive. I could go further in the spring, although I worried I would find the south of Portugal too hot by then. But apparently the blood thins. Sunny weather certainly made things easier. I worked on the boat removing the radar reflector and a damaged aluminium bar from between the twin backstays. I could hang the paraffin lamp on the backstay using a rolling hitch which would slide up or down but grip like mad, also known as a camel hitch. It is possible to climb a wire stay if each foot is placed in a loop attached to a camel hitch. The lower one is slid upwards while standing on the upper, and vice versa. I never attempted it, but used a knot for adjustable steering lines, flying the ensign and attaching a paraffin lamp to the wire backstay. And if I ever meet a camel, I shall know how to hitch that too. Lunchtime in the Pasteleria was relaxed and quiet, free of the brash energy of morning. Sunshine slanted across the blue and white tiled floor, and gulls laughed on the roofs outside. I ate a proper savoury croissant with ham and cheese, much better than the previous day's sweet and savoury mix of bolo with ham and cheese filling. When the sun shone, things felt so much better, and my list lay in my new bag, almost completely discharged. November the 6th. A computer consultant went to lunch halfway through installing a new hard drive. I was hungry and went to the big supermarket nearby to buy food. A flock of women alighted next my table. I hired a mountain bike for €3, as I had a fair amount of toing and froing to do. The bike was wonderful. I needed to go back to the boat to pick up a Windows bootable disk, then I had to find an adapter to use my laptop with European electric sockets. The latter was difficult to find, and I was glad for the bike as I went to a number of shops in the search. I learned another Portuguese word, adaptador. My laptop had been loaded up with Windows, however, the whole operating system was in Portuguese. I had thought it was simply a matter of changing the language in the settings, but not so. The whole system had to be reinstalled using my own disk. Of course it was more complex because there were several extra drivers which needed to be added from the web. I was glad someone was doing it for me, as I would have found insurmountable difficulties in doing it myself. A very warm and sunny day with a lovely cool north wind made me think seriously again of sailing to Cascais, near Lisbon, despite feeling comfortable in Peniche with its hardware stores and the very low marina fees. I had an urge to carry on cruising. The Gecko Index remained unfulfilled. During my stay in Nazaré, I'd gone on a coach to visit the catamaran Piece 4 in Cascais. At the time I was thinking seriously about staying the winter months in Nazaré, and I wanted to visit Cascais to help me make up my mind. Nazaré was simply too rural for my long-term needs, whereas Cascais had swift and cheap access to Lisbon. Cascais itself was a substantial town with tourist facilities. I liked urban spaces with shopping malls, and Cascais Shopping was as big as any I'd ever seen. Cascais Shopping was a cluster of hypermarkets and superstores under one roof. I went to experience a bit of shopping, and first went into a vast music and video store. Listening posts with headphones allowed me to bathe in an oral feast of new music. A gallery of photographs set in a semicircular space with a comfortable leatherette settee allowed the visitor to sit looking at the images and listening to a soundtrack with complete visual and oral screening from the rest of the store. The images were of the Burning Man festival held in the Arizona desert of the US. The people captured by the images were astonishing. Tattooed, plaited beards, silver space costumes. The vehicles these freaky people drove had bizarre body adaptations, which made them look like spaceships or seed pods. It was a celebration of individual creative spirit and diversity. There was not a fisherman to be seen, nor a sardine. November the 7th. Riding through Peniche on a mountain bike, hopping curbs and occasionally dropping off steps, I felt so much at home. It was just like being back in Bristol, where I would so often ride my bike in search of an outlying non-ferrous scrapyard or somewhere such as a reinforced tubing supplier. The months leading up to a departure from the UK were memorable for the intense and relentless effort to reduce the length of a big to-do list. The to-do list would grow each day as departure became imminent. As I added more gear to the boat spares, raw material for running repairs and more food every day, the bows dipped downwards and the blue water line disappeared under the surface. One of the most important things in a boat is to keep her buoyant, and being nose down is not the best trim for handling large seas. So, as well as making, fixing and altering the boat and equipment, I was also discarding things. I gave away bits of spare anchor chain, a stainless steel chimney, a dinghy inflation pump, a roll of headlining material, alloy poles, stainless steel sheeting, plate, bar and tube. I was the gift horse of the boatyard. My offerings eagerly accepted as the poor old boatyard denizens added them to the pile, which would anchor their hearts for yet another year. To leave a marina after several years was a great effort of will. Such interesting stuff comes along from people passing through, or from the occasional sailor who leaves. To travel is to reduce clutter. Only at a critical point of lightness will a journey commence.